For 38 years, my husband went to the bank every Tuesday. I told myself it was just routine, something simple, something harmless. After he died, I thought the truth had already been uncovered. I believed there were no more surprises left in our marriage. But I was wrong, because what I found next didn't explain his secret. It redefined our entire life together. And once I understood why he never missed a single Tuesday, I realized some truths don't come to free us. They come to change us forever. The house felt quieter after the funeral. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that presses against your chest when no one is left to speak. I stayed in my black dress longer than I needed to, not because I was mourning, but because changing clothes felt like admitting that life was moving on without him. Richard had been gone for 3 weeks. 38 years of marriage reduced to paperwork, sympathy cards and casseroles I never finished. Every morning I still reached for my phone at 8:10. That was when he used to leave the house on Tuesdays. Same coat, same leather briefcase, same calm goodbye. Only now, Tuesdays came and went without footsteps at the door. I told myself I was done uncovering secrets. The lawyer had already explained the accounts. The bank statements made sense. Or so I thought, until a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a key, not a house key, not a car key, a bank deposit box key, and taped to it was a note only 5 words long. I couldn't protect it anymore. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at that key. It was heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in meaning. Richard had always believed in protecting things quietly. Problems, people, truths. That was who he was. I wanted to ignore the key, to slide it into a drawer and pretend it meant nothing. But secrets don't disappear when ignored. They grow. So the following Tuesday, without thinking too much about it, I took my coat and drove to the bank. The same bank. The one he had visited every Tuesday for nearly 4 decades. I parked in the same spot he always used. Only this time I walked in alone. The teller was young. Too young to remember Richard. She smiled politely when I placed the key on the counter. "I believe my husband rented a deposit box here," I said. "My name should be listed now." She typed for a moment, then stopped. Her expression changed, just slightly. "Yes," she said softly. "Box 317. She paused. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to open it today?" That question unsettled me more than it should have. "Yes," I replied. "I'm sure." She nodded and led me to the private room in the back. When the metal door closed behind us, I felt something shift inside my chest. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was preparation. Before I tell you what I found inside that box, let me say this. If you find comfort in quiet stories like this, you're always welcome here. The teller unlocked the outer latch and stepped back, giving me privacy. My hands trembled as I turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft click. I lifted the lid, and everything I thought I knew about my husband, about our marriage, about the life we built, began to unravel. Inside the deposit box, there were no stacks of cash, no gold, no dramatic proof of betrayal. Instead, there was a neatly tied bundle of letters, dozens of them, all yellowed slightly at the edges, arranged carefully with a faded blue ribbon. Every envelope was addressed to the same person, not me. A woman's name I had never heard before. For a moment, my mind rushed ahead of my heart. I imagined affairs, a second life, decades of lies carefully hidden behind polite smiles and shared dinners. But then I noticed something else. The return address on every letter was our home, our kitchen table, our pen holder, our stamps. I sat down slowly, the box still open in front of me. The first envelope was dated 37 years ago, 1 year into our marriage. My hands hesitated before opening it, as if part of me already understood that once I read these words, there would be no going back. The letter began simply. I don't know how to explain this without sounding like a coward. Richard's handwriting. I knew it instantly. He wrote about responsibility, about promises made too early, about mistakes that couldn't be undone. Only managed. Then came the line that made my breath catch. She deserves stability. I can't give her my name, but I can give her safety. I closed my eyes, because suddenly the rhythm of our life made sense. The careful budgeting, The missing money that never quite added up. The way he never complained about working late. And then I saw what the letters were really about. They weren't love letters. They were updates. Monthly notes about payments. School years. Medical bills. College applications. Richard had been supporting someone quietly. For decades. Not a lover. A child. My heart didn't break all at once. It cracked in slow, painful pieces. I had no memory of betrayal. No evidence of an affair. But I was standing in a bank room, realizing my husband had lived an entire responsibility, parallel to our marriage, and he had never trusted me enough to share it. I kept reading. Each letter carried the same tone. Restrained. Careful. Distant. He never said I love you. He always signed them the same way. I'm doing what I can. At the bottom of the box was something heavier. A manila folder. Inside it was a single document. A birth certificate. The father's name was blank. But under financial guardian, there was a familiar signature. Richard's. And beneath it, a date from 22 years ago. That meant the child was grown now. Older than the secret. Younger than our marriage. I sat there holding that paper, realizing something else. Richard hadn't been hiding from me. He had been carrying something alone. I left the bank without knowing what to feel. Anger didn't fit. Neither did grief. What I felt instead was distance. A space between who I thought I married and the man he actually was. And that space was larger than I could have imagined. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat in my car across the street from the bank, watching people come and go as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. The woman's name echoed in my head. I had read it again and again inside that quiet room, hoping it would suddenly become familiar. It never did. She wasn't a coworker. She wasn't a family friend. She wasn't anyone who had ever stepped inside our home. And yet, she had been part of my husband's life for nearly 4 decades. I unfolded one of the later letters and read it again. Richard wrote carefully, choosing words like someone afraid of leaving a trace. She asks questions now, he had written. I tell her some truths, and I hide the rest. I hope one day she understands why. Questions. That meant the child knew something. Just not everything. When I finally drove home, the house felt different. Not emptier. Foreign. Every object suddenly seemed capable of lying. The armchair by the window where Richard used to read. The calendar on the fridge, still marked with his tidy handwriting. The drawer where he kept spare keys. I opened that drawer. Inside, beneath old batteries and instruction manuals, was another envelope. Same handwriting. Same careful pressure of the pen. This one was addressed to me. I sat on the edge of the bed before opening it. Part of me already knew what it would say. The letter was dated 2 days before he died. If you're reading this, it began. Then I've run out of time. He wrote that he had planned to tell me, that he had rehearsed the conversation for years. But fear always arrived first. Fear of losing me. Fear of judgment. Fear of forcing me to carry something he believed was his burden alone. I never stopped choosing you, he wrote, even when I failed you. That line hurt more than any accusation could have, because it wasn't a denial. It was a confession. At the end of the letter, there was an address, not a home, a nursing facility, and beneath it, one final sentence. She doesn't know about you. Please be kind if you go. I folded the letter slowly. This wasn't just about truth anymore. It was about what to do with it. The nursing facility was only 15 minutes from our house. I had driven past that road countless times, never once thinking it held anything connected to my life. The building was modest. Brick walls. A small garden out front where a few residents sat quietly in the afternoon sun. I stayed in my car longer than necessary, not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I was afraid of who I might become once I saw it. When I finally walked inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. A receptionist looked up and smiled. I'm here to see. I hesitated before saying the woman's name. She checked the computer and nodded. Room 214. She's expecting someone, actually. That made my chest tighten. Expecting someone. Not me. The hallway felt longer than it was. Every step echoed louder than it should have. When I knocked gently on the door, a voice answered. Come in. The woman inside was older than I expected. Her hair was gray, pulled back neatly. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, folded as if she'd practiced waiting. She looked up and studied my face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "You must be his wife." I nodded. She smiled. Not warmly, not coldly, but with recognition. "He talked about you," she said. Always with respect. That wasn't the comfort she thought it would be. We sat across from each other in silence. Finally, she spoke. "Richard helped me when I had no one else. I was young, scared. I made choices that followed me my entire life." Her voice never wavered. "I never asked him for more than what he offered." She continued. "He made it clear his life was with you." That sentence sat between us like a fragile truce. She reached into her bedside drawer and pulled out a photograph. A young woman holding a baby. "I named her Anna," she said softly. "She's 22 now." My breath caught. I had imagined this moment 1,000 ways. None of them included calm. "I didn't come to accuse you," she added. "I came because he asked me to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For the truth," she said. Part 5. I didn't ask to see Anna that day. Not because I didn't want to, but because some truths need space before they are faced. The woman, her name was Margaret, watched me carefully, as if she were measuring whether I would shatter or simply learn how to carry something heavy. "She lives nearby," Margaret said. "She doesn't come often. Life's busy at her age." I nodded, though my thoughts were elsewhere. Anna was 22. That meant she was born during the early years of my marriage. Years I remembered as simple, hopeful, uncomplicated. Richard had come home every night during those days. He had kissed my forehead, asked about dinner, spoken about work, and somewhere in between, he had been someone else too. I never told her everything. Margaret continued. "She knows he helped us. She doesn't know why." I looked at the photograph again. The baby's eyes were wide, curious, too young to know the shape her life would take. Did he ever want to meet her? I asked quietly. Margaret smiled, a small, sad smile. "He met her many times," she said. "Just never as her father." That word, father, landed softly, but deeply, because Richard had been careful with names, with labels, with distance. He chose presence without ownership, responsibility without recognition, and suddenly, I understood something painful. He hadn't been hiding love. He had been managing guilt. That night I lay awake in my own bed, the bed we had shared for decades. I imagined Richard sitting beside me, holding his secrets the way he always had, close, controlled, silent. I wondered if he ever lay awake too, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much truth a marriage could survive. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something colder, understanding. The next morning, I found myself standing in the kitchen, holding my coffee, staring at the calendar still hanging on the wall. Tuesdays were marked in pencil. Every single one. Not with words. Just a small dot. A habit I had never questioned. Until now, I reached for my phone. Not to call Margaret. Not to call the bank. But to search for a name. Anna. I didn't know what I was looking for when I typed Anna's name into my phone. Maybe a photograph. Maybe proof that she was real. Or maybe I just needed to see a face that carried part of the man I had loved for so long. The internet is generous with fragments, not with meaning. There were dozens of Annas, different cities, different lives. But then I found her, not because of her name, but because of a detail Richard once mentioned without realizing it mattered. "She likes old libraries," he had said once casually. I remembered because it struck me as oddly specific. Anna worked at a small public library, 2 towns over. Her profile photo was simple. No filters, no posé. She looked ordinary, and that somehow made everything heavier. She had Richard's eyes, not the color. The expression, that thoughtful distance, that way of looking at the world as if listening for something just beneath the noise. I closed the app quickly. Finding her was one thing. Deciding what to do with that knowledge was another. That afternoon, I returned to the deposit box. I hadn't finished reading all the letters. Some were short, some apologetic, some purely practical. But the later ones changed. Richard wrote less about money and more about fear. "She's building her own life now," one letter read. "Soon she won't need my help." I should feel relief, but instead I feel erased. Another said, "I wonder if I've mistaken silence for protection." That sentence stayed with me, because it was the same mistake he had made with me. I realized then that Richard hadn't just hidden a child. He had hidden himself, the parts that were unsure, the parts that were ashamed, the parts that needed forgiveness. And by doing that, he had left the rest of us, me, Margaret Anna, to assemble the truth without him. That evening I stood at the front door, coat in hand. I told myself I was just going for a walk, but I knew better. I was standing at the edge of a decision that could not be undone. I didn't end up going to see Anna that night. Instead, I went home. I told myself I needed sleep, time, distance. But life has a way of deciding timing for us. Just after 9, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent. "Careful!" I stood still in the hallway listening. The knock came again. When I opened the door, a young woman stood on the porch, hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater, eyes searching my face with quiet caution. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "I think you were married to Richard." The world narrowed. "Yes," I said. She swallowed. "My name is Anna." We sat at opposite ends of the living room. She kept her coat on, as if she wasn't sure she would stay. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "My mother told me today. About everything." That surprised me. Margaret had never struck me as impulsive. "He asked her to tell me if anything happened to him," Anna continued. "She said I had a right to know, and that you had a right to meet me." Her voice trembled slightly. "I'm not here to take anything," she added quickly. "I just needed to see the place he lived." I nodded, because suddenly I understood that this was her grief too. She looked around the room slowly. "He always described this house in small details," she said. "The blue curtains, the oak table, the clock that runs fast." My throat tightened. Those details were mine, and yet they had belonged to her imagination for years. "He never spoke badly of you," she said. "He said you were kind, strong, that you deserved peace." Peace. That word felt far away. We talked until midnight. Not about betrayal. Not about blame. About books. About weather. About how strange it is to miss someone you never fully had. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. "I don't know what this makes us," she said. But I didn't want silence anymore. Neither did I. After Anna left, the house felt different. Not heavier. Shared. Her presence lingered in the quiet corners, like a question that had finally been allowed to exist. The next morning, I opened the folder Richard had kept hidden for years. Inside were documents I hadn't fully examined before. Not bank statements, not secrets meant to protect him, but instructions. Carefully typed, organized, almost gentle. There was a trust fund, modest but steady, set to continue supporting Anna through graduate school, if she chose it. And beneath that, something unexpected. A letter addressed to both of us, to Anna, and to me. "I don't know if you will ever sit in the same room," he wrote. "But if you do, I hope you understand that what I left you is not confusion. It is care." He explained that he had never wanted inheritance to become competition. He had divided everything precisely, fairly, quietly. Not equally, but intentionally. "I couldn't give Anna my name," he wrote. "And I couldn't give my wife this truth. These were my failures." That word again. Failures. Later that afternoon, Anna called. "I didn't sleep much," she said. "I keep thinking about things that don't have answers." I understood. "Would you like to meet again?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yes," she said. "But not at the house. It feels too final." We chose a small cafe near the library where she worked. Neutral ground. She arrived early, sitting by the window, watching people pass. When I joined her, she smiled, cautiously. "I found his handwriting in my mother's things," she said. "He used the same words with you, didn't he?" I nodded. "He thought consistency meant safety," I replied. She laughed softly. "I think it just meant loneliness." That was the first moment I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, understanding. The cafe was quiet in the late afternoon. Outside, people moved with purpose. Places to be. Lives already decided. Inside, Anna and I sat with 2 untouched cups of coffee, and a truth neither of us had asked for. but both of us were now carrying. I used to imagine him differently, Anna said after a while. Not as a father, but as someone braver. I understood what she meant. So did I replied. We smiled at that gently, not in agreement, but in recognition. Anna looked down at her hands. Anna's words stayed with me long after we left the cafe. Someone braver. I thought about that as I drove home, about how bravery is often mistaken for loud decisions, when in truth it usually shows up quietly, or not at all. That night I opened the closet Richard used most. Not to search, just to stand there. His jacket still smelled faintly of the soap I didn't cry that night, not because I felt nothing, but because everything felt too heavy to move. Grief doesn't always arrive with tears. Sometimes it sits beside you, waiting to be acknowledged. I sat at the kitchen table where Richard and I had eaten for years. Same chair, same view of the window, same ticking clock. But the silence had changed. Before it was comfortable, shared. Now it felt unfinished. I realized something then. Richard hadn't just left secrets behind. He had left questions with no owner. Questions I could never ask him. Answers he would never explain in his own voice. And yet, I found myself listening for him anyway. The next morning I went through his old notebooks. Not the ones he used for finances, but the small worn ones he kept in his bedside drawer. Most pages were mundane. Grocery lists, phone numbers, reminders. But near the back, his handwriting changed. Slower, less certain. I wonder if silence is kinder than honesty, he had written once. Or if I'm just afraid of what honesty would cost. I closed the notebook, because I finally understood something painful and true. He hadn't chosen silence because it was right. He had chosen it because it was easier. That afternoon, Anna called. I keep thinking about what he didn't say, she told me. And how strange it is to miss words that were never spoken. I knew exactly what she meant. He loved us in the only way he knew how, I said. But love without truth leaves a bruise. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't want my life to be built on silence. Neither did I. If you find comfort in quiet stories like this, you're always welcome here. That evening I placed Richard's notebook back in the drawer, not because I was done with it, but because some things don't need to be revisited to be understood. I looked around the house one more time, and for the first time since his death, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt human, flawed, learning, still standing. Part 12. People talk about forgiveness like it's a gift you give someone else. They never tell you what it takes from you. I thought forgiveness would feel lighter, like relief, like closure. Instead, it felt like work. Quiet, exhausting work no one applauds. A few days later, Anna came over again. This time, she took off her coat. That small act meant more than she realized. We sat in the living room, not across from each other, but side by side. She picked up a framed photograph of Richard and me from. Forgiveness didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. Small moments that didn't announce themselves. Like the morning I realized I hadn't thought about. Richard's secret first thing after waking up. Or the afternoon I laughed at something Anna said, and didn't feel guilty about it. Those moments surprised me, because for a long time I believed healing meant forgetting. I was wrong. Healing meant remembering differently. Anna began visiting more often. Not regularly, not predictably, just enough to feel intentional. Sometimes we talked about Richard, sometimes we didn't, and sometimes we talked about nothing important at all. Those were my favorite conversations, because they felt normal. One afternoon as we folded laundry together, Anna asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder who you'd be if you'd known earlier?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth wasn't simple. "Yes," I finally said, "but I also wonder who I'd be if I let that question define me now." She nodded. That's when I realized something unexpected. We weren't bonded by him anymore. We were choosing each other. If stories like this help you slow down and reflect, you can always stay a while. That night after Hannah left, I sat alone again. But it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like space. Room to decide what mattered next. Richard's choices had shaped my past, but they didn't get to dictate my future. I started noticing changes that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with choice. Small things at first, The way I rearranged the furniture. The way I stopped apologizing for taking up space in conversations. Richard had shaped so many years of my life without ever intending to control it, but I finally understood that some parts of me had been waiting quietly for permission, that never needed to be asked. Anna noticed it too. She said I looked different, not younger, not happier, just more present. I told her it felt like learning how to stand, without leaning on a story that no longer existed. She smiled at that and said she felt the same. For the first time, we were not reacting to what Richard had done. We were responding to who we were becoming. One afternoon, I went back to the bank. Not out of anger. Not even curiosity. I wanted to close the loop. The clerk recognized me and offered condolences again. I thanked her and asked for the box to be officially closed. As I signed the final paper, I felt no rush of emotion. Just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finished because I had decided it was. That night, I cooked dinner for one. I didn't set an extra plate. I didn't save leftovers out of habit. I ate slowly, listening to the sounds of the house, and realized that independence doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in when you stop waiting for something to return. I thought about Richard then, not with resentment, not with longing, but with accuracy. He was a man who loved imperfectly and tried to fix his mistakes quietly. That was his limitation, not my inheritance. When I went to bed, I didn't ask myself what he would have wanted. I asked what I wanted, and for the first time in a long while, the answer felt like it belonged to me. Time did not soften the truth, but it did teach me how to carry it without letting it cut into everything else. I stopped measuring my days by what had been lost and started noticing what was still intact. My routines changed. Mornings became slower. Evenings felt less like something to endure and more like something to occupy with intention. Anna and I settled into a rhythm that did not need explanations. We checked in without obligation. Some weeks we spoke often. Some weeks we didn't. There was no guilt in the silence anymore. Silence had stopped meaning abandonment. It simply meant life was happening elsewhere for a moment. One Sunday afternoon, Anna asked if I would like to see where she grew up. Not to revisit the past, she said, but to understand it. I agreed without hesitation. We drove through neighborhoods I had never known existed in my own city. Modest houses, narrow streets, the kind of places that hold entire lives without drawing attention to themselves. As she pointed out the small landmarks, I realized something important. Richard had not lived two lives. He had lived one fractured life, split by fear, not by intention. That distinction mattered. It did not excuse him, but it explained the quiet desperation behind his choices. When we returned, Anna thanked me for coming. I told her she didn't need to thank me for letting me understand. That night, alone again, I thought about how truth does not always arrive to punish. Sometimes it arrives to reorganize what you thought you knew, so you can finally see what remains. What remained for me was not anger, not even grief. What remained was clarity. And clarity, I was learning, is its own kind of peace. The changes didn't announce themselves. They never do. One day I realized I had stopped rehearsing old conversations in my head. I no longer imagined what I would say to Richard if he were still alive. The arguments had lost their audience, and without an audience, they slowly faded. I began doing things simply because I wanted to. I joined a small reading group at the local library, the kind where no one tried to impress anyone else. On the first day, I caught Anna watching me from across the room, not as a daughter looking for approval, but as another adult witnessing a life in motion. That look mattered more than she knew. We talked later about boundaries, about what we owed each other and what we didn't. We agreed on something important without ever formally stating it. We were not here to replace anyone, not a wife, not a father. We were here to move forward without pretending the past hadn't happened. There were moments when the weight returned. It always does. At the grocery store, in quiet evenings, in the sound of a familiar song. But those moments passed more quickly now. They no longer demanded my full attention. I had learned that pain loses power when you stop giving it the center of the room. One evening, Anna asked me if I regretted staying in the marriage, staying in the dark. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told her regret assumes you had access to the truth when the decision was made. I didn't. I lived the best life I could with the information I had. That realization felt like a release. As I turned off the lights that night, I understood something simple and grounding. Healing was not about fixing what broke. It was about the choosing what deserved to continue. And for the first time, I was choosing myself without apology. There came a morning when I woke up and realized the past had finally gone quiet. Not erased, not forgiven in some dramatic way. It simply stopped asking me to explain myself. That silence felt different from the one Richard had left behind. This one felt earned. I made coffee, opened the window, and let the day arrive without attaching it to memory. Anna and I met later that week for a walk by the river. We talked about ordinary things, work, weather, a book she was reading. I noticed how little effort it took now to be. Life didn't pause to honor my understanding. It kept moving forward in small, insistent ways. The garden needed tending. The mail arrived whether I was ready for it or not. These ordinary demands grounded me in the present, reminding me that meaning is often built quietly, without witnesses, about something unimportant that had happened at work. I listened, genuinely interested, and realized that our relationship no longer revolved around explanation or repair. It had settled into something simpler, mutual presence. That felt like a gift neither of us had asked for, but both of us were finally ready to receive. I returned to old habits with new awareness. I cooked meals I enjoyed. I walked routes I had never taken before. I allowed myself to imagine years ahead without needing to define them. The future no longer felt like a test I might fail. It felt open, which was far more honest. One afternoon, while sorting through the last of Richard's belongings, I found a note he had written but never finished. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. It was a list of ordinary things he loved. Morning light, coffee shared in silence, the sound of pages turning. I understood then that he had known what mattered. He simply hadn't known how to live fully inside it. I folded the note and placed it back where it belonged. Not hidden, not displayed, just returned. That act felt complete. I wasn't preserving his memory anymore. I was acknowledging it without letting it shape me. That night, as I turned out the lights, I didn't feel the need to measure how far I had come. I simply felt present in my own life. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Healing did not arrive as a moment of victory. There was no clear line where pain ended and peace began. It showed up in practical ways. I stopped checking my phone for messages that were never coming. I stopped explaining my life to people who only listened out of curiosity. I learned that healing is often invisible, to everyone except the person doing the work. Anna and I reached a place where we no longer talked about Richard unless there was a reason. His absence stopped being the center of our conversations. Instead, we talked about plans. Not big plans, realistic ones. She spoke about moving cities someday. I spoke about downsizing the house. These were not escape plans. They were life plans. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch, I realized something important. I was no longer waiting for the past to apologize. I was no longer hoping for understanding from someone who could not give it. That waiting had quietly ended, and with it, a long season of emotional exhaustion. Healing, I understood, is not about feeling good again. It is about feeling steady, and steadiness had finally found me. Not everything disappeared when the truth came out. Something stayed. The discipline Richard had taught me, the patience built over years, the ability to sit with discomfort without running from it. These were not excuses for his choices, but they were parts of my life I no longer needed to reject. I began volunteering once a week at a local community center. It wasn't about purpose. It was about presence. Listening to stories that were not my own reminded me that pain does not belong to one narrative. Everyone carries something unseen. That realization softened the way I moved through the world. Anna visited less often, not because we drifted apart, but because our connection no longer required maintenance. We trusted the space between us. That trust felt like the final proof that something healthy had grown out of something broken. One evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she looked different, but because she no longer seemed defined by what had happened to her. She looked like someone who had learned how to stay. There is a quiet freedom in no longer explaining your past. I stopped offering disclaimers about my marriage. I stopped correcting people's assumptions. The story no longer needed an audience. It belonged to me, and that was enough. I sold the house in the spring, not because it hurt to stay, but because I was ready to leave without running. I kept a few things: the kitchen table, a photograph, one notebook. The rest went where memories go when they have taught what they needed to teach. On my last night there, I sat on the floor and thanked the life I had lived. Not just the good parts, all of it. Gratitude did not mean approval. It meant acknowledgement. That distinction mattered. As I locked the door, I didn't look back. Not out of anger, out of certainty. I was not abandoning my past. I was carrying it properly. People think this story is about betrayal, or secrets, or loss. It isn't. It is about what happens after the truth arrives and no one tells you what to do with it. It is about learning that love can be real and still incomplete, that honesty delayed still shapes lives, that silence protects no one forever. Most of all, it is about choosing to live without being defined by someone else's fear. If this story stayed with you, it isn't because of the secret. It is because somewhere inside it, you recognized a quiet part of yourself that kept going even when clarity came late. And if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of a truth you did not ask for, remember this: you are not required to rebuild your life around it. You are allowed to move forward, gently, honestly, and on your own terms. If this story stayed with you, you might like the others too. You can subscribe anytime.